Good evening, everybody. This is Sunday evening, the 27th of December, and I hope you all had a very Merry Christmas, and I wish you all a Happy New Year, and I hope you're enjoying this wonderful long break. Before we begin with this evening's lecture, I do want to mention to those of you who drive with Tim, apparently he's been away. I didn't realize that. So if you haven't heard from him, please don't worry. Okay, he will be in touch with you. He's actually returning on Tuesday, so he's looking to arrange some driving times for mid to late week. So he will be in touch starting on Tuesday or Wednesday. Okay. Um, okay, so today we're going to talk about managing risk again, but specifically, we want to discuss time and space today. If you recall, last lecture dealt with vision. So today, in managing risk, we're dealing with the dimensions of time and space. The assignment that is based on this lecture will be emailed to you later this evening, and it would be due as usual next Saturday, which would be January 2nd. So by 11:59 p.m. next Saturday is when you should submit this assignment, and this would be assignment number 8. Okay, so managing time and risk. Of course, it involves, when we manage time and risk, the two things that we're managing really are speed and position. And it all boils down to making good decisions. Now, when we make good decisions in anything in life, but particularly now in driving, we evaluate our options, and we also consider what possible consequences could result from any option we take or any action that we follow. Okay? Understand that when you're driving, you're making decisions in, a fraction of a second. And obviously, the more experience you have, the better able you are to make that instantaneous decision. But the human mind and our physical coordination is pretty amazing, that we can make decisions instantaneously, okay? And in order to make those instantaneous good decisions, several things really have to be in play. Number one, as I said before, you want to have an adequate amount of information about driving and about driving conditions. And that really boils down to experience. Okay? Number two, you want to know the rules of the road, of course. And number three, you want to, specifically with that experience, comes also an awareness of a variety of different types of traffic conditions and environments. So again, what does it take to make good decisions? Three main factors. Number one, you want to have an adequate store of information about driving and driving conditions. Number two, you want to know the rules. And number three, you want to have experienced a variety of traffic conditions and environments. Now, what are the kinds of decisions that we make when we drive? Well, there are three questions that we answer when we make those decisions. And sometimes we answer multiple questions at the same time, sometimes one at a time. Okay, and these are the questions that pop into our head. So the first type of question is what that we answer. Okay, some examples of the what question: what time to start a certain maneuver, what route to follow, what lane to be in, what speed to be at, what maneuver we should make, what controls do we use, what methods do we use to communicate. I'll run through them again. Some common what questions: time to start, what route to follow, what lane to choose, what speed to drive at, what maneuver we need to make, what controls to use, and what methods do we use to communicate with other drivers. Then there are the when and where questions. Okay? When and where to meet other traffic, when to yield, when to stop, and of course where as well. When and where to perform maneuvers, when and where to signal, when and where to change direction, when and where to change speed. Okay, so again, some when and where questions. When and where to meet other traffic, to yield, to stop, to perform maneuvers, to signal, to change direction, or to change speed. And of course, how much? How much to accelerate? How much to slow down or brake? How much to turn the steering wheel? How much to communicate? How much to accelerate, slow down or brake, turn the steering wheel, or communicate? So it's a wonder we're able to do all these things. But again, the human mind is just an amazing thing. And so all of these questions can be answered very quickly, but again, that's based largely on our knowledge and experience, as we said before. Okay? When we decide a course of action, certain things we have to consider. Number one, the primary directive is always to choose the action that involves the lowest possible level of risk. Now, that's not always easy to do, but that should be your guiding principle. Choose the action that involves the lowest possible level of risk. Okay? And in doing that, you're choosing actions that make a given situation more manageable. Remember, risk is unavoidable. We can't avoid risk altogether, but we can manage risk, right? So, the important decisions that we make are magnified. The risk to those situations can be magnified based on certain things, such as roadway conditions, your own actions, and the actions of others. And a fourth factor that can magnify the risk in our decision making is vehicle malfunction. Okay? Again, what are the things that might magnify or increase the risk? Roadway conditions, your own actions as a driver, the actions of other people, whether drivers, pedestrians, bicyclists, or vehicle malfunctions. So these are things that complicate those decisions. Okay? Now, most important decisions are about managing time and space to minimize risk. So in large part, we're talking today about managing time and space because that, is really what we're doing most of the time when we are managing risk, when we are choosing to go with options that create the least amount of risk. So the first thing we need to consider is selecting the best path of travel, okay? And that involves identifying your intended path of travel. So, of course, by definition, your intended path of travel would be the space into which you can safely direct your vehicle with the lowest possible risk. Your intended path of travel should always be the space that you steer your vehicle into to be in a situation where you have the lowest amount of risk. Now, most roads have marked lanes, but some roads don't. Okay? And just kind of a gauge for you, a number that you should be aware of, your typical lane on a road is 10 to 12 feet wide. So what I would say to you is this: if you don't have marked lanes, then imagine a lane, okay? And one way to visualize that is to imagine there's a carpet that's rolled out in front of you. And that carpet is 10 to 12 feet wide. And so if you think of it that way, again, if there are no lines, if you think of it that way, that might be a good image to kind of visualize that 10 to 12 foot space, okay? A couple of things that are significant in identifying your path of travel, your intended path of travel, is not to fixate your eyes. And we talked about that in the past. Your eyes should always be moving, okay? You don't want to fixate on one object, all right? And you always want to the best of your ability, to identify an alternate path of travel in the event that there's an emergency. You have to react quickly, even if it's a shoulder on the side of the road, okay? Now, what are some factors that will affect our choice of path? Number one, roadway conditions, okay? What kind of road are we approaching? What's the surface of the road like? Is the road in a state of repair, or are there potholes? Okay, are there all kinds of bumps and things? Um, are there items and debris on the road? So the roadway conditions are one factor that will affect our decision on our intended path of travel. A second factor would be off-road conditions. Okay, um, are there shoulders? Are there objects that obstruct our view? Okay, are there conditions that could adversely affect our vehicle? So are we approaching steep shoulders, ditches, poles, trees on the side, signposts, guardrails, potholes? All of these things are, whether they're road conditions or off-road conditions, are things that are going to impact our decision. Number three, traffic conditions. So we want to obviously recognize what the traffic looks like up ahead, okay? And therefore start determining potential actions that we may need to take. And finally, in terms of the factors that are going to influence our choice of intended path of travel, would be the unexpected. The idea of always expecting the unexpected, okay? Unpredictability. And you've heard me use the expression defensive driving. Always anticipate that other drivers are going to do the wrong thing. So, just a few, one statistic two statistics that I want to give you, and I think I may have given this statistic to you before, in terms of the fact that people make wrong choices, that the unexpected happens. A study was done with over 1,000 drivers, and 67% of those drivers were found not to stop at stop signs. That's pretty amazing. 67% of drivers not stopping at stop signs. And that number goes up to 90% when we're on residential streets. So when you're in a very quiet area, 90% of people in that particular study do not stop at stop signs. Okay? Some other things to keep in mind about traffic conditions and about the unpredictability of driving. Rush hour. Many times intersections are especially dangerous during rush hour because people get caught in intersections after the light changes. Okay? Because traffic is backed up. All right? Many people, rush hour or otherwise, fail to signal, and I think you're discovering that already. Many people pass under dangerous conditions. Okay, they will be passing you when they shouldn't be. You deal with bicyclists and pedestrians darting in and out of traffic. All right? Always give yourself an alternate path of travel. And sometimes the shoulder of the road, especially when you're on a highway, is your best option. So, some questions to ask when you select your path of travel. Number one, which path offers the maximum visibility? And it's not only that you can see most clearly up ahead and as far ahead as possible, but it's also that you can be seen by others. So visibility. Number two, which path provides the most clear space to the sides? Okay, you want to have as much space right and left of you as possible. Number three, which path provides the smoothest flow of traffic? Number four, which path provides the best roadway surface? And number five, what are the traffic laws up ahead? Okay, you need to know what you're driving into. All right? Let's talk about space margins. A space margin, of course, by definition, would be the space that exists between you and objects around you. Okay? Whether it's objects ahead of you, to your sides, or behind you. Okay? And the better the space margin, the bigger the space margin, the better you are able to react to situations, and also the better visibility you typically have. Okay? The space margin size, a healthy space margin size, allows you distance, time, and line of sight. Distance, time, and line of sight for safe movement. You need space to be able to brake and accelerate. You need space to allow for mistakes, whether they're yours or somebody else's. And you need space to effectively escape in an emergency. And of course, the amount of space that you need around you is going to depend, obviously, on the width and the type of vehicle that you're driving. It's going to depend on your speed, naturally. Distance and speed, as you know from physics, are integrally linked. And it's going to depend on the maneuvers that you're going to make. Whether it's a turn, or whether it's, pulling out of a driveway, or whatever it might be. Okay? So the size of the space and the shape of the space margin will depend on those factors, and they also will depend on such things as weather and highway and traffic conditions. Let's start specifically talking about the space margin to your front. And we want to introduce some terminology: stopping zone and following distance. Okay, we already know the aggressive visual search. We've mentioned this multiple times. Involves the 12 to 15 second visual control zone, right? And also the 20 to 30 second visual lead. So you know those numbers already. I'll introduce new numbers here, and the numbers are what we would call the 4 to 5 second stopping zone. Meaning that under ideal conditions, notice I say ideal conditions, so such things as weather, etc., may change this number. Under ideal conditions, it takes 4 to 5 seconds for a car to stop at highway speed. Okay, and as I said, stopping time is going to increase with adverse weather and road conditions. Okay? Now, braking distance and speed, your braking distance is going to depend on your speed and road conditions. And so again, that 4 to 5 second stopping zone, okay, the amount of time it's going to take you to go from the speed you're at to a stopping position is 4 to 5 seconds. Keep in mind that 0.5 to 0.75 of a second elapses for reaction time and perception. Remember, of that 4 to 5 seconds, 0.5 to 0.75 of a second is how long it takes to perceive of a situation and to react to it. Okay? So, your stopping zone is 4 to 5 seconds, which means that your following distance, typically, should be 3 to 4 seconds between you and a car in front of you. Now, that's for speeds under 50 miles an hour. If you're going more than 50 miles an hour, you should allow for greater time to stop between you and the car in front of you. And that all depends on the speed. But you want to add at least a second, maybe 4 to 5 seconds or 5 to 6 seconds when you're going more than 50 miles an hour. Okay? And for certain physical conditions, whether you're fatigued or ill, you might want to add some time to that as well. Maybe instead of 3 to 4 seconds, it should be 4 to 5. And I just learned this recently. I never realized this, but I read that for people over 55, I'm 56, you should make it 4 seconds rather than 3 as far as following distance. So people in my age bracket, our reaction time is going to be a little slower than yours. Okay? So here's a little trick. You could do this on your own. If you're driving with your parent, if you're driving with, your instructor. How do you practice the 3 to 4 second rule? Well, it's really very simple. Take a look at the car in front of you and find a fixed object that car is going to pass. So maybe it's a pole. Okay? And you watch that car, and when the back of that car passes that pole, you start counting. And you count until the front of your car reaches that pole. So again, if you want to practice this, to get an idea of how this flows and to get a sense of that time and space, you look at the car in front of you. First you find a fixed object in front of you. A pole, a sign, a light, whatever it might be. You watch the car in front of you, and as it passes that fixed object, as the back of that car passes that fixed object, is when you start counting, and you count until the front of your car passes that object, okay? And I would count, 1,000, 2 1,000, 3 1,000. And so you want to make sure that you end up passing that object between 3 to 4 seconds after the back of the vehicle in front of you passed it, okay? You do also want to increase following distance not only with greater speeds, but also with larger vehicles, all right? So keep that in mind. And one of the rules, and the textbooks don't really teach this anymore, but I do. And I always, and I've said this to you before, 1 car length per 10 miles an hour is also a good reference point. So if I'm doing 60 on the highway, I should be able to fit 6 cars between me and the car in front of me. So that's another way to kind of gauge your speed. Let's talk about space margin to the sides. Now, in addition to having space in front of you, you want space to the right and to the left of you. So again, you can account for errors in judgment. You can have an escape path. And ideally, you want to have, at least on one side of your car, enough room to fit another car between you and whether it's, another car or whether it's the curb or guardrail. You want to have, now ideally if you can have enough space to your right and your left, where you could fit a car on your right and your left, that's great. You're not always given that option. You're not always given that luxury. So at the very least, you want a space margin on one side. And that space margin should be about the size of one car, okay? And, if we're talking about the width of a car, we're talking about maybe about 8 feet, all right? Now, if for some reason, and there are situations where this happens, especially if you're in traffic, and there's a lot of traffic, well, there's nothing you can do about it. You've got cars on your right and your left. But, anytime that you're limited on both sides, whether it's traffic, whether it's, guardrails on both sides, whether it's, high curbs, whatever it might be, if you don't have that cushion on your sides, you always want to leave yourself extra space in front of you. Okay, so at least you have more cushion there, all right? As far as space margins to your rear, that's harder to control than the others. And typically we're talking about cars that tailgate, okay, cars that are too close to you, all right? And some things you can do if a car is tailgating you. One thing is, as I said before, if you don't have space margins on your sides, similarly, if somebody's tailgating you, give yourself more room ahead, okay? So you maintain do your best to maintain an escape route on your right or your left. Slow gradually, all right? And as you're slowing down, this is a trick also, as you're slowing down, move a little bit to the right. So in that way, you're telling the car behind you, I'm letting you pass, okay? And don't engage him, don't, go extra slow, don't hit your brake, none of that stupid stuff. Just slow down a little bit, move to the right a little bit, and 99% of the time, he will go right around you and pass you. If it's safe to do so and you're really aggravated, you're on a side street and you want to just pull over and let him pass, by all means, but don't engage with that individual, okay? So, using space to minimize risk. Well, sometimes there are obstacles that we need to pay close attention to, okay, that may require you to leave extra space. So for instance, if somebody's changing a flat tire on the side of the road, you may want to increase that space cushion, okay? If you see that there are objects like bushes or buildings, etc., that are limiting your line of sight, you might want to give yourself more space. You might want to slow down a little more, okay? Try to avoid driving in packs. And again, packs would mean you have cars surrounding you, and you're kind of going together at the same speed. You always want to stay away from the pack, Okay? That may mean reducing your speed. It may mean changing lanes. It may mean both. Okay? So when it comes to effective managing risk, time management is so vital. Timing is everything. Okay? So, you must know how much, and this comes with experience, how much when an object moves into your 3 to 4 second space zone, you need to know when and how much to adjust your speed. Okay? And you need to have the ability to judge as best as possible when and where other objects are going to cross um, into your space zone. And again, that really largely comes with experience. Okay, but just a few tips: avoid passing where there's reduced visibility, or changing lanes where there's reduced visibility. Avoid passing where you're going to encounter holes or bumps in the road, wet leaves or ice, water. Okay. Try to avoid passing big trucks if it's very windy, if there's a crosswind, because you don't want to get stuck in a situation where you're next to a truck and now you're losing control of your car. Some other things about timing that I would just throw out there. Missing a turn, very common we miss a turn. Okay, no U-turns, no stopping short, no none of that nonsense. Just keep going and get off the next exit or make turn at the next intersection. It's as simple as that. Okay, it's better that you're a little late for something than that you endanger yourself for others. Focus on one thing at a time as best as you can. And specifically I'm talking about if you're doing maneuvers. You don't want to be making a right turn and as you're turning, adjusting the radio or the heat or the sun visor. Okay, you want to be focused on that particular maneuver and only that maneuver. All right? You may encounter situations, and oftentimes you do, especially driving in the city, busy parts of Staten Island, you'll see this, or if you go into Brooklyn or wherever, where you have multiple possible risks at the same time. So for instance, if you ever drove down New Dorp Road, down near Farrell, okay, very, very busy, New Dorp and Highland. And if you're coming up New Dorp from Amboy, you're going to have people crossing the street in the middle. You're going to have bicyclists, motorcycles, and cars and trucks. And, you've got all these risks, possible risks going on at the same time. And what you want to do is compromise your risks. So what I mean by that is you need to make decisions about which is the greater risk. And that's the area that you want to be protective of the most. So for instance, if somebody is about to cross outside of the crosswalk, and while you got cars coming towards you in the other lane, you may want to move over to the left, even though cars are coming towards you. If you have a little bit of room, move a little bit more to the left to protect that pedestrian, okay? Because that pedestrian is the greater risk at that moment. So, you have to make decisions like that in busy areas, okay? Selecting your best speed. There is something called the basic speed law, and you should be aware of what that is. The basic speed law is the speed that the speed that you should be going, maximum speed that you should be going under ideal conditions. So, for instance, if you see a sign that says the speed limit is 30 miles per hour, say you're on Highland Boulevard and there's an area where it's 30 or 40, right? It goes back and forth. That's for ideal conditions. So that would mean the weather is good. Okay, that would mean that the traction of the road is favorable. You're not encountering a construction site or potholes or ice. All right, your line of sight is clear. You don't have a giant truck in front of you. Okay, you don't have cars weaving in and changing lanes and affecting your space. Okay, the basic speed law says that you can go that maximum speed under ideal conditions, and you must adjust your speed to the given road conditions. So let's suppose it's raining. It's a steady rain, and you are doing 30 miles an hour, and the sign says 30 miles an hour, and a police officer pulls you over. and you say to the officer, why am I being pulled over? I was doing 30 and a 30. That officer could very well, in his or her judgment, say to you, you were going too fast for the weather conditions. And you can get a ticket and have to pay the summons. Okay? Um, Keep in mind that, our minds act very quickly, but, we aren't, machines. Okay? So, there is a limit to how quick and how much information we can gather at one time. And just a little tidbit of information, the human mind at a glance can collect anywhere between 5 to 7 bits of information at a glance. So when you glance at something, whether it's a number, a letter, a symbol, a light, okay, if you're looking to your right or left ahead of you as you're driving, at any given glance, you can only take in as many as 5 to 7 items. Which is why, if you ever think about it, if somebody gives you their phone number, now these days, when I was a kid, the area code, and we didn't have cell phones, and the area code in all of New York, up until my teenage years, the area code in all of New York was 212. And it was only when I was maybe in my early teens that certain parts of New York went to 718, like Brooklyn. Okay. But prior to that, if you lived in New York City, somebody asked for your phone number, there was no thought to giving an area code, and you didn't have to dial the area code. Everybody was 212. Okay, so you just gave the 7 digits. And so, in those days, if somebody gave you a phone number, it was easier to remember it because it was, 7 digits. And the human mind gets 5 to 7. Now, again, a lot of cell phone numbers have the area code 917 or 347, right? Those are the most common. So, if you're getting a cell phone number and you have to remember it, you could probably categorize it into, somebody says 917, that may not be so hard to remember because it's so common. But my point is, once you introduce those 3 other bits of information, it makes it harder to remember. Okay? Okay, and as we said before, the human brain takes about, and remember we said before, 0.5 to 0.75 of a second to process information. Okay, to absorb the information and make a decision. That takes up to a half a second or 3/4 of a second. So just to give you a gauge on that, let's suppose you're doing 55 miles an hour on the highway. Okay, in 1 second, your car travels 80 feet. So, if you're distracted, okay, for as little as half to 3/4 of a second, you're lagging in that half or 3/4 of a second. When you look back, you've already traveled 80 feet, okay, which is about 5 to 7 car lengths that you've traveled in that, half to 3/4 of a second. All right. So, keep that in mind that once you're distracted, even if it's for less than a second, you've traveled a significant distance, which is why glancing at your cell phone or looking at the radio is always a dangerous thing. Okay. And the last word of advice in terms of managing space and time and distance is general rule: the closer you are to an object, the slower your speed should be. Okay? All right, so we talked about managing space in terms of, distance and time. All right? Again, managing risk in terms of space, distance, and time. So I think a lot of what I had to say in this particular unit hopefully was common sense. But on paper, it's common sense. A lot of it is difficult for a beginning driver because, again, it takes practice and it takes experience. And that's what really rules the day. Okay, folks, enjoy the rest of your evening, and I will be posting, emailing to you the assignment for this lesson that you will do by next Saturday. And I hope you enjoy the rest of your break, and a Happy New Year to all of you and your families.